Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're diving into some of the most incredible stories of survival and endurance, tales of prisoners who have survived their sentences. These aren't just any sentences, we're talking about decades, even lifetimes, spent behind bars. From the early 1900s to the modern era, these individuals have witnessed history unfold from the confines of their cells, enduring the unimaginable. So, buckle up as we explore their stories, understand the crimes that led them there, and unravel how they coped with the long years in prison. It's a journey through time, resilience, and the human spirit's capacity to endure. Let's get right into it. Paul Geidel Jr.'s story is one that defies belief, a tale of a life almost entirely spent behind bars, marking one of the longest prison sentences in American history. Born in 1894, Geidel's journey into the annals of the criminal justice system began in 1911, when at the tender age of 17, he was convicted of second-degree murder. His victim was William Jackson, a wealthy New Yorker, whom Geidel killed during a burglary gone wrong. This crime, which shook the local community, led to his sentencing of 20 years to life. What makes Geidel's story so extraordinary isn't just the length of his sentence, but how his life unfolded within the confines of various New York State prisons. Year after year, decade after decade, he remained behind bars, witnessing the world change dramatically from the confines of his cell. The Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, World War II, the rise of television, the moon landing, all these historical events passed while Geidel was incarcerated. One of the most haunting aspects of Geidel's story is his repeated refusal of parole. Over the years, he became eligible for release multiple times, but chose to stay in prison. Some speculate that the world outside had become too foreign, too intimidating for someone who had spent most of his life in a cell. The concept of freedom, after so long, seemed more daunting than the familiarity of prison walls. Finally released in 1980, after serving nearly 69 years in prison, Geidel stepped into a world that was unrecognizable. At 86, he found himself in a society that had moved on without him. He spent his final years in a nursing home, living quietly until his death in 1987 at the age of 93. Paul Geidel Jr.'s story is a somber reflection on the criminal justice system and the concept of rehabilitation. His life, swallowed by time and the prison system, raises profound questions about punishment, reform, and the very nature of human adaptability and resilience. John Sonny Franzise's life reads like a script straight out of a classic mob movie. Born in 1917 in Naples, Italy, he emigrated to the United States with his family, settling in Brooklyn, New York. Franzise's story is intertwined with the history of the American Mafia, particularly the Colombo crime family, one of the infamous 5 families that dominated organized crime in New York City. Franzise rose through the ranks of the Colombo family, gaining a reputation for his street smarts and loyalty. By the 1960s, he had become a capo regime, commanding his own crew. His name became synonymous with the dark and violent world of organized crime. Loan sharking, extortion, and robbery were said to be his domains. One of the most fascinating aspects of Franzise's life was his alleged involvement in the entertainment industry. Rumors swirled that he had a hand in financing some of Hollywood's notable films, including the classic Deep Throat. This venture into Hollywood, if true, showed the breadth of his influence and the reach of the mafia at the time. However, Franzise's life of crime caught up with him. He faced multiple arrests and convictions. In 1967, he was sentenced to 50 years in prison for bank robbery, a sentence that would see him in and out of jail for the next several decades. His ability to avoid significant jail time for many years fed his notoriety and even admiration among some. John Franzise's later years, following his release from prison, were marked by a notable shift in his life. After serving part of his 50-year sentence for bank robbery and several other stints in prison for parole violations, he was released in 2017 at the age of 100, making him one of the oldest federal prisoners at the time. His release brought to an end a significant chapter in his long history with the American criminal justice system. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby's life story reads like a script from a bygone era, a narrative steeped in history, tragedy, and a twist of redemption. Born in the late 19th century, Grigsby's name etched itself into the annals of criminal history when he was convicted of murder in 1908. The crime, committed in Indiana, led to a conviction that would see Grigsby spend over 66 years behind bars, one of the longest sentences served in the United States. Grigsby's life in prison began at the Indiana State Prison, a place he would call home for the majority of his life. His imprisonment spanned a remarkable period in history, witnessing events such as both World Wars, the Great Depression, and the Civil Rights Movement, all from within the confines of his cell. During his time in prison, Grigsby's life was not entirely bleak. He became something of a celebrity, known for his boxing skills. He even reportedly sparred with the famous heavyweight champion, Jack Dempsey. This period of his life highlights the strange juxtaposition of notoriety and confinement that defined his existence. Grigsby's release in 1974, at the age of 89, marked a significant transition. After spending the majority of his life in prison, the world outside was a drastically different place. His reintegration into society was a challenging process, one that many long-term inmates face upon release. In a turn of events, Grigsby's story after prison took a positive path. He found work as a janitor at a church in Indianapolis, a role he held for several years. His later years were spent quietly, a stark contrast to the tumultuous early years of his life. Johnson Van Dyke Grigsby passed away in 1987, leaving behind a legacy that serves as a stark reminder of the impact of long-term incarceration. His story is a blend of historical significance and personal tragedy, offering a unique perspective on the American penal system and the resilience of the human spirit. Francis Clifford Smith's story is a stark testament to the complexities of justice and the human cost of long-term imprisonment. Born in the early 1930s, Smith's life took a dramatic and dark turn when he was convicted of murder in 1950, as a teenager. The crime, committed in Massachusetts, resulted in a life sentence that would see Smith spend over 6 decades behind bars. Smith's time in prison began when he was just 17 years old. His incarceration spanned across a period that saw the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement, the Cold War, and the Digital Revolution. Yet, Smith experienced these world-changing events from the isolation of his cell, a reality far removed from the world outside. Throughout his years in prison, Smith became one of the longest-serving inmates in the history of the United States. His case occasionally garnered media attention, highlighting the implications and moral questions surrounding life sentences for juveniles. Smith's situation brought into focus debates about rehabilitation, redemption, and the potential for change. Despite being eligible for parole, Smith faced numerous rejections over the years. Each denial added to the already long stretch of years he spent in incarceration, further entrenching his life within the prison system. In the latter part of his life, Smith's case reflected the ongoing discussion about the aging prison population and the challenges faced by elderly inmates. His life, largely spent in the confines of the penal system, stands as a poignant example of the enduring impact of a life sentence handed down in youth. Francis Clifford Smith's story, spanning over 60 years in prison, raises critical questions about the nature of justice, the possibility of reform, and the human capacity for endurance under extraordinary circumstances. Richard Honeck's life story is one of the most extraordinary tales of incarceration and eventual freedom. His journey through the criminal justice system began in 1899 when he was convicted of murder in Illinois. At the age of 22, Honeck stabbed and killed Walter F. Kohler over a letter that allegedly insulted his brother. This violent act led to Honeck receiving a life sentence, which turned into one of the longest prison terms ever served in the United States. Honeck's time in prison spanned an incredible 64 years and 1 month. To put this into perspective, he entered prison at the turn of the 20th century, a time when automobiles were a novelty and airplanes were yet to take flight. He witnessed monumental events in history, from World War I and II, the Great Depression, the rise of television, to the dawn of the space age, all from behind bars. During his imprisonment, Honeck was transferred to various facilities, including the infamous Joliet Correctional Center. He was noted for his good behavior and even took up writing, contributing articles to a prison magazine. Despite numerous parole denials over the years, Honeck maintained hope of eventual release. Finally, in 1963, at the age of 84, Honeck was granted parole. He emerged into a world vastly different from the one he left. His reintegration into society was a significant adjustment, having spent the majority of his life in prison.